Lucy Parsons. Welcome to today's show. Today we're talking all about A-level economics, what it's like and what it is. And it's an interview with a very special person, Bill Morrison, who was an economics teacher for over 20 years, as well as being head of the economics and business department. But not only that, he was an examiner and a principal examiner, which means he set economics A-level exams and marked them for various different exam boards. So he's somebody who really knows what he's talking about. And when we listen to the interview, you will hear just how passionate he is about A-level economics, because he just loves the subject. So in the interview today, you can find out what A-level economics is, what it's like to study it, and where it can lead in life. However, before we go into today's interview, I just wanted to let you know about the How to Revise Economics A-Level Masterclass that Bill is, our guest speaker for in the Extraordinaries Club on the 27th of March 2021. And if you're listening in the future, the recording of the masterclass will be in the club in perpetuity. So in the masterclass, Bill is bringing all his expertise to show students how to revise A-level economics effectively. And when students come to the masterclass, they will discover how to know which content you need to revise for your exam board, as well as how you'll be examined, how to choose revision techniques for A-level economics that will work for you, how to revise to make sure you demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of A-level economics, how to practice your application skills and particularly your use of case studies, how to use data response questions and news articles to develop your analysis skills, how to develop your evaluation skills, one of the hardest skills at this level of study, and how to use resources on exam board websites to improve your exam technique to get as many marks as possible. So if you'd like to learn from Bill, who is a highly experienced teacher and principal examiner, about how to revise A-level economics, you can find out more about that using the link in today's show notes. It's right at the bottom of today's show notes, and you can find the show notes at lifemoreextraordinary.com/A-level economics. That's all one word, A-level economics. So it's lifemoreextraordinary.com/A-level economics. Okay, let's get on with today's show. Welcome to the School Success Formula, Bill Morrison.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to take part.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to have you here. So before we get started, Bill, can you first tell us a bit about yourself and why you're talking to us about A-level economics today?
Okay, yes, so my sort of history involves from leaving school. I went to university and I actually dropped out very, very quickly. And I ended up working in finance for high street banks and also managing high street National Building Society branches. And after about 10 years, I got a bit fed up and I thought I really ought to go and do the degree that I should have done 10 years ago. So I actually went back to university as a mature student. And as part of my sort of banking career, I had undertaken some study for the banking exams, the Institute of Bankers, part of which involved economics, and I loved it. I hadn't studied it ever before, and I loved it. So I thought, I think I'll go and do an economics degree. And so I went to Liverpool and had a fabulous 3 years. Loved the subject, and then sort of fell into teaching. So it wasn't on my radar as such. But anyway, I became a teacher. I did 2 years teaching, economics, business, GNVQs as they were in the day, as well. And then I moved over to Cheshire to teach an independent school, became head of department quite soon after, and spent the last 22 years as head of departments for economics and business, until I took early retirement. During that time, I started examining both for business, A-level, GCSE, and economics, A-level. Became a principal examiner, so I actually had a period of time of actually setting papers for the AS economics, and I thoroughly enjoy doing the marking as well. Actually, I still carry on with it. So yeah, that's me. Why am I here? Good question, but I actually I love economics. I love the subject. I loved teaching it, and the sort of knowledge that I've gained over the last 20 odd years in examining and delivering the subject, I want to help impart some of that, to students, and hopefully encourage those that might be thinking of studying it to give it a go. Give it a go.
That's a fascinating story, and I love the fact. Well, I think it's really interesting the fact that you started university and then dropped out and then went back 10 years later, because one of the things I see quite a lot with the people in my community is this: everybody wants their children to go through the education system, step by step as it's kind of laid out, GCSEs, A-levels, straight to university, get a job, blah 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 blah. And sometimes people's life path, or the way they're maturing, or whatever else is going on in their lives, like maybe health problems or whatever, doesn't lead to that very linear progression through the ordained stages. So I love the fact that you shared that with us, and you can still make a successive life if you don't tick off those boxes as everybody's expecting you to.
Absolutely. I've always said to students, look, okay, it's an exam. If it goes wrong, it is not the end of your world, your life, because you can do degrees. There's people doing degrees age 70 and so on and so forth. So, it isn't, you haven't got to go through that, as you say, that linear, this is what you have to do in life, otherwise you're not successful, because that's nonsense and wrong.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Okay, let's carry on talking about economics. So Can you tell us what economics is? Because I think lots of people have got this preconceived idea that it's about money. So give us a little bit more about what economics actually is.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that people think it's about money, because what I normally do at the first lesson is ask students two questions. Why have you chosen economics? To which the general answer is, sounds interesting. And what's it about? It's about money, isn't it? And it isn't. In fact, economics is actually really about how do we go about using the limited resources that we have to satisfy society's needs and wants. Okay, that sounds a bit bland. But in basic terms, because we have limited resources and unlimited needs and wants, we can't have everything. So we have to come up with ways of thinking, well, how do we allocate resources? And how do we go about it? And so we would then start to look at, well, okay, economics starts with three questions. And it's called, and together they form what's known as the fundamental economic question. And it's the question of what. So what are we going to produce, provide? How? And that refers to how we're going to manage resources. And within those, we've got something we refer to as factors of production: land, labor, capital, enterprise. So how are we going to combine these things? And finally, how do we decide who gets these things in society? Now, of course, you can go along a system that we refer to as a command economy. Mm-hmm. So a command economy, if you think of really sort of communist states where the decisions are made by central government, or you can go to the very end of the spectrum and go to a totally free market economy. And this is where we start to look at supply and demand and where prices come from and why prices change. And generally, the forces of supply and demand will dictate what is actually being produced and where resources are allocated. So as economists, we're interested in making sure that these resources are allocated efficiently. So the word efficiently comes up all the time in economics. So that's sort of a general nitty-gritty outline. And I'll talk a little bit more about the other aspects of it shortly. But I wanted to point out that students think economics is about money. And actually, if you think about it, the history of money is probably about 300-400 years old in the way that we understand it. And actually, as part of my degree, one of the papers I read was based on the economics of prison. Yeah, so if we decided, you know, if we were to go open a brand new prison and bring inmates in who'd never met each other before, within next to no time, it will have its own economic system, okay? And it will have a medium of exchange, okay? So all a medium of exchange is a way of deciding the value of things. Now, if you don't have a medium of exchange, then you're down to bartering. So if you fancy, if you've got some chickens that you've kept, but you fancy beef, apologies to vegetarians, etc. If you fancy beef for your tea, you've got to go out and find somebody who's got beef, who also wants chicken.
Yeah.
And you've got to barter, you've got to find out the value of it. So what assists that is this thing called a medium of exchange. Now, our medium of exchange, of course, is money. But in a prison, it can be anything from, going back a little bit, phone cards, tobacco, and so on. And that becomes their medium of exchange. And so, yes, money comes into it, but economics is not just about money. The money helps us to develop our economic systems. There's only a very small part of it all. So I wanted to bring that in. So yeah, so that's our starting point. Now, economics is split into two, more than two, so to speak, nowadays, but microeconomics, which is looking at individual markets and how they operate and so on and so forth. So we do a lot on supply and demand and price mechanisms. And what causes prices to change, etc. And then the macroeconomic side, which looks at the big picture. So we're now looking at the economy as a whole. So we're looking at what's going on in the markets, but looking at all those markets as one. And on macroeconomics, we're going to be concerned about looking at things like unemployment, inflation, our balance of payments. So how do we, you know, what's our trade like with the rest of the world? So exports and imports. How do we make our economy grow? How do we create jobs? How do we become wealthier as a nation over time? And so we would look at the various tools that government can use. Obviously, last week we had the budget and talks about taxation, etc. But there's other things that we can do to manage the economy, create jobs, and so on. So that's that side. I'll be honest, my favourite bit, and I hogged the teaching of this, was the microeconomics. So just fascinating stuff, because we go on, once we've got an idea about how the price mechanism works, why the prices change, etc., we can then go on to start to think about how we can influence those things. And more importantly, the problem is, if economics was an exact science, as such, I wouldn't need to teach it, because every economy would be doing the right thing. But within the economy and within markets, you end up with something referred to as market failure.
Mm-hmm.
So the subject starts off saying, "Look, hang on, we have a problem here. We're trying to keep everyone happy with limited resources. So we've come up with this system. We've got a price mechanism, hunky dory. Let supply and demand sort it out. If people don't want something, the demand will fall, the price will fall, and producers won't produce as much, or the product will disappear.
Yeah.
And those resources become freed up to be used elsewhere. That's the perfect situation. But it doesn't happen because we get this market failure. And market failure comes in lots of shapes and forms. We talk about things like negative externalities. So we're looking at here where the operation of a market might appear to be working nicely, but its operation is now having negative impacts on third parties, so people not involved. Easy example. When you get in the car and you drive to work, school, wherever, you don't actually think about much at all. And the only things you're considering are things like, well, I've got the petrol to pay for, the car insurance to pay for, the wear and tear, and so on. And that's the only cost that you as an individual will take into account. However, of course, you're driving along, you are now polluting the atmosphere and having a negative impact and imposing costs on the rest of society. And those costs can be in the form of hospital admissions through the effects of pollution and so on, accidents, of course, and the like. So that market, although it appears to be working, is actually failing. We can have market failure in the labour market. Of course, unemployment is clearly a market failure. We can have positive externalities, and the classic one at the moment, of course, is the vaccination program that is being run out very successfully. Because if you have a vaccine, then that benefits society as well. So, for example, my daughter had the privilege of going abroad to a country where she needed to have, I think it was yellow fever.
Yeah.
Yellow fever is not a vaccine that is available on the NHS free of charge. You pay for it. So off she went, paid her 50 quid. That's an economic transaction. But I benefit and you benefit because now the likelihood of infection being passed on is reduced. And so there's cost savings again on the NHS and so on. So we look at market failure. We look at market failure in terms of market structures as well. Things like, should we be breaking up the supermarket industry? Is too much power in one hand? So that's a general. So that's why I love it, because you can start to investigate so many different things with it.
It's really everything, isn't it? It's like how we operate as individuals in relation to one another, isn't it?
How we operate as individuals in relation to one another, and how, even though you are one amongst a population of 60 odd million, you can influence markets.
Yes.
Okay, but certainly as a group of people, of consumers in a particular market, then we have massive power. In fact, we refer to it in economics as consumer sovereignty. The consumer is king, because if we decide not to buy it, its price will fall, probably disappear.
Yeah, it's so some things become obsolete, don't they? Like you mentioned phone cards earlier. Nobody buys one of them anymore.
Exactly, and the classic one is the move from VHS tapes to DVDs, and now DVDs starting to be usurped by streaming.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so all dynamics as well. Just wanted to mention as well that so we've got the micro side, that's looking at the little picture, the individual markets, the macro from the big picture. Easy to remember, microwave, of course. All comes from the Greek anyway. Yeah. And then, but we now following the change in specifications, introduced another branch of economics, which can be applied on a macro and micro scale, and that's called behavioural economics, which I think is really, really interesting. And behavioural economics is looking at how can we alter people's behaviour without necessarily going down the route of, so for example, if we wanted people to use their cars less, the traditional economist is going to come around and say, right, tax the car user, be it on petrol or road tax, subsidise alternatives, make them cheaper, okay, get people to pay per mile, so road pricing. Now, behavioural economists will say, well, how can we achieve something similar, but without having to go down this sort of command control approach? So how can we, and we refer to nudges,
Yes,
how can we nudge people to do the right thing? A classic nudge is if you're driving along and you approach a roundabout. And quite often you have those yellow lines across the road that are slightly raised. Now, they actually get closer together as you get closer to the roundabout. The idea being that you perceive that you're still going at a fast speed.
Yes.
So it encourages you to slow. It's a nudge.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they use it in canteens and things as well, don't they, to affect.
Absolutely.
So if you put like chocolate bars next to the place where you pay, people will buy chocolate bars, but if you put apples there, they pick up apples.
Absolutely. And again, this is one of the reasons why governments have stepped in and said to supermarkets, can you not put sweets at the checkout at children's eye level, to change behavior. It's a fascinating subject. I could talk all day about it. and I think it's a great addition to economics courses. I think the one last thing about studying economics and what it involves, it is a numerical subject, okay? And students ought to have an awareness of that. In fact, I think if I'm right, all A levels have a numerical element to them to a certain degree. But
it's more than the average A level, isn't it? Because
yes.
I was a geography teacher, and we always had stats in geography, but I would anticipate that economics had more stats in it than, or more.
If my memory serves me correctly, I think it's something like about 20% of the paper students sit in normal times on numerical. But by numerical, that's everything from carrying out a calculation to being able to interpret a chart, a graph, and so on. So
what level of maths do they need coming in? Do they need a really good GCSE maths grade, or do they just need a pass?
Well, I would, that's a good question. I would say you'd want to be a good, solid, in old money B, in new money sort of the 6.
Yes.
Comfortable with it, but to an certain extent at A level, it's not really much more beyond. There's nothing more. You can cope with A level economics numeracy. With your GCSE knowledge. But I want to come back to that a bit later on, something that we'll just to refer to on that a bit later on. So, gosh, hopefully that's given.
Yeah, I think that's a really thorough overview of what this subject
is. An insight into it.
And it sounds fascinating. I wish I'd considered it when I was choosing my A levels, but I couldn't do them all. So, and I would have done probably.
Goes well with geography.
Yeah, it does. So, lots of people kind of think of economics and business together. So what's the difference between them?
Right, again, a good question. And the clue is, sorry, light's going. The clue is really in the old days, prior to the new specs, business A level was, of course, business studies A level. So with business studies, what what you are doing is you are studying how businesses operate. So in sort of, if you think about your average business, it's going to have a number of functions that it's going to be undertaken. There'll be a financial side to it, financial management side to it, marketing, ops management, and so forth. And you're looking and studying at how businesses can initially sort of how these functions work. And then when you sort of get A level, it becomes a bit more strategic. How do you change those functions? How do you actually organize the business, and so on and so forth. So it is studying how businesses operate, and everything from looking at financial accounts, and so balance sheets and profit and loss accounts, or income statements as they are now known, showing my age, as well as looking at, like as I've said, sort of operations management. Do you want to operate on a large scale, small scale? Marketing, are you going to be a niche market? So you're looking at it, and I always say to students that when you get to A-level economics, first year you tend to study it as if you're middle management, overview of particular areas. At the full A level, you're really in the sort of directorship type roles, and looking at the whole company and what strategies you can implement to achieve your aims. So that's what you're looking at. You're studying businesses.
Yeah, so it's more kind of applied in a way than economics, which is more kind of looking at things in a more kind of aggregated kind of way.
Sort of, but not quite, because like I said, business is how do businesses operate, and how can we make them operate better? Now, within a business studies A-level course, there'll be a fraction of it that looks at how does the economy affect us. Okay, so it's just a small slither of overlap between the two. One way of sort of trying to explain to students a difference is a subtle example. We talked about road usage previously, and the pollution, and how can we control that. So if the government wants to control pollution from car usage and cut back on car usage, it could go to an economist and say, how do we do it? And the economist say, right, here are some tools you can use. Might not be effective, depends on price, elasticity of demand, and so bringing all the economics in, but you could tax the car user, and you could take some of that tax and subsidize bus companies and train companies, and so on. So we've got the problem. The economist has said, here's a solution. The government goes down the route of taxing road users. The person in business is now thinking, oops, how do we deal with these additional costs?
Yeah.
And can I pay? So there's the problem in the middle. The solution comes from an economist, but the business student is going to be asking the question, how do we deal with this new problem?
Yeah, so like the car manufacturer is thinking, how do I deal with this problem? And you might have like local garages as well that want to service cars, thinking, you know, how do I make more money if people are using their cars less and having them serviced?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a world of difference between the two.
Yeah.
And it's important students appreciate that. On that point, when I was head of the department, I never had an issue about a student who wanted to do both economics and business. Some schools don't allow it. I didn't bother me one iota. And I think in the 22 years, only one student said it was questioned by the university they're applying to.
Yeah.
So, but it's just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Very, very different.
So how do you know if economics is a good A level for you to choose?
Okay, it's a good question, because generally students will not have studied it. Some schools do it at GCSE, but generally not. I think, if anything that I've said has sparked your interest so far, then it is something that you may wish to look at. So the first and foremost, if you're interested in what is going on in the world, and I mean anything from politics, why are governments doing such and such? Why aren't governments rolling out vaccines as quickly as elsewhere? Why is petrol so expensive? Why is my car insurance, because I'm 18, through the roof? Anything that you might read in newspapers, etc., that sparks an interest and makes you ask questions, then you're likely to be a good candidate for economics as a starting point, because economics will give you the answers to some of those questions that you are raising. And I suppose a starting point of thinking about it is obviously talk to teachers, look at textbooks, and start reading quality newspapers, and say, well, that interests me. I've made a note of 4 headlines from today's Times newspaper.
Okay.
Other newspapers are available.
Yeah,
by the way, obviously.
And that we're recording this on the 10th of March, 2021, for anybody listening in the future.
Okay, I hope somebody's listening. But anyway, so these Times articles, article number 1, Whitty rules out hope of early end for lockdown. There's loads of economics in here. Things like impact on government finances, furlough schemes. We had the budget last week. How are we going to pay for this lockdown? Impact on unemployment, etc. Nice headline. Oasis once played for a hot meal. Okay, that's Oasis, the band. Once performed for a hot meal. Question, well, what incentivizes people? Economics is a lot about incentivizing people in the markets. And why do people earn different amounts of money? A whole new part of the labour market section that you would study. COVID costs put councils at risk of financial failure. Okay, so again, I'm thinking, okay, so what do we do? If we want to keep leisure centres open, do we increase council tax? If we increase council tax, how does that affect households, what I'd refer to as discretionary income, the money they have left having paid their bills? And if they don't have discretionary income, maybe they won't be able to afford to go to the leisure centre anyway. You know, and it's like, if you start to think like that, you're going to be a good economist. And then sunny times ahead. Greece to welcome back Britons. Okay, so Greece is saying, yeah, we're going to do that. Immediately, it's an interesting one. A lot of students find this amazing when I tell them, if you go on a holiday and you have a meal in a Greek restaurant, that's actually goes down as a UK import, even though you're consuming it in Greece. So there's a whole impact on our balance of trade, our exports and imports and so on. That's just 4 headlines. I could have gone on and on and on. And almost all headlines, generally, I could say there's economics in there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I used to do from day one with students is saying, right, you've had your first economics lesson, first homework, here's a scrapbook. You're going to get a news article and you're going to tell me a little bit more about it that's not in the news article. And it's amazing how within a few weeks, students are actually bringing economics to help explain the articles that they're collecting.
I love this. I absolutely love it, because it's helping people to think critically, but also to engage. Well, it's not just critically, but like it's curiosity, isn't it? It's engendering curiosity, but it's an inquiry of what is actually happening and impacting people's lives. in the here and now. And I always say, as a geographer, like, geography is everywhere, and geography is in everything, and it feels like the same can be said about economics.
Absolutely. And I think that the beauty of starting to do that and be actively involved in your own learning, it brings the subject to life, because you're now applying it to real life stuff. B, the exam, let's assume life's going to be normal next summer for exams. Or certainly, hopefully, for lower six students starting this September, this next academic year, doing their A-level in 2 years' time. The exams that they will be sitting will be being put together round about the time they start the course, possibly 6 months into the course. Examiners will be sat there thinking, right, I need some source material. And the source material will come from news articles, etc. So you're getting into that frame of mind where you can start from the early stages of being able to analyse and develop an argument, and actually start to evaluate, well, actually, I think the government's response to this particular issue is a load of nonsense. And explain why it's a load of nonsense. Because we will give you, as teachers, a good ex-colleague of mine, a really good friend, a superb economics teacher, always referred to it as the economic toolbox. We are teaching you tools that you can then say, hey, we've got this problem, let's take this concept of price elasticity of demand and apply it to this problem. And so on and so forth.
It turns you into a better citizen because you're able to interrogate what's going on in your society. But it also, it's this toolbox, like that word that you used. It's a way of, it's useful, isn't it? You're a problem solver, aren't you?
Absolutely. And economic students that get engaged from day one, and take an active interest in what's going on around them, will be superb analysts. They'll be able to evaluate, and those are two massively important skills for any job that they wish to do in the future.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on. And can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to study A-level economics? So what can you be expecting to do on a kind of day-to-day basis?
Day-to-day basis. Studying economics, as I've said, really is from day one, where you're going to be exposed to real-world situation scenarios. Obviously, as a teacher, I have to go through various concepts and ideas and then put them into practice. My teaching approach was always, look, okay, if I'm going to talk about demand and demand curves, we'd build up the theory, and then we would look at news articles. Well, how's that information going to shift the demand curve one way or the other, and so on. So it's a bit of a case of I suppose, going back to the idea of the economic toolbox, you wouldn't give a carpenter's set of tools to somebody and say, build me a boat, without any training. We have to do that bit of that didactic lesson approach and didactic teaching. But then the rest of it then is all about saying, right, how can we apply this to these situations? And I think that's what makes, generally, economic lessons really interesting.
And thought-provoking, aren't they?
Thought-provoking. And if you're a student that wants to challenge, fabulous. One of the last groups I taught, there was a student in there would challenge everything. Because it was his way of saying, well, actually, why would that even happen? It doesn't make sense that somebody would do that. And you could get in a real good debate about it. And what he was actually doing was slowly but surely sort of saying, there's a counter argument
Yes.
to this. You know, you've said if we increase taxes, people will consume less. Is that definitely so? Why would that happen? You know, okay, I can see the price going up, but so anyway, it's well, certainly my lessons. I can't speak for other economics teachers, but I tended to say, look, here's some theory, now let's use it. Let's use it in these real world examples. And then obviously what we're trying to do then is to build the students' analytical skills and their evaluative skills as well. And of course, as soon as we are able to, we will start to expose students to, look, we've done this. Here's a past paper. You can't do the 25-mark essay because you haven't got all the tools. But certainly we would start working on, you know, past paper questions where appropriate. I found micro teaching a little bit easier because micro is the small pictures, the looking at individual markets, and you can do nice little individual lessons on these tools, so maximum prices, minimum prices, and so on, and work with them. Macro is one where students may find initially what is going on, because macro is definitely one where the big picture comes together a little bit further down the line.
You have to kind of be patient while you wait.
Patient with it.
All those things to come together for you to get that overview.
Absolutely, and the key thing here as well with both the micro and the macro is in terms of studying it. This is a whole new ball game. It's got its own language, and because of that, you need to revisit lessons. Having listened to another these podcasts, that came across quite clearly in there as well. You've got to revisit. You've got to practice.
Yeah.
Within economics, there's a lot of diagrams.
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me a minute. A lot of diagrams, and some can get quite technical. But you practice, and the students got to be willing to practice. A poor diagram is worth nothing in an examination. But likewise, a good diagram is also worth very little if you then never refer to it.
Yeah.
So being able to explain succinctly what is going on in that diagram. So lots of diagrams, lots of juicy, interesting articles to read and to apply your knowledge.
Lots of discussion. Oh,
loads of discussion and arguments in particular. I mean, I've done stuff when we were looking at market failure, setting up a lesson. It was based about who should pay for flood defences.
Interesting.
And I gave them some information, numbers, facts, figures, etc. One group were arguing that it should be. I had to come up with an argument that it should be households, and the other group that government. And that was fab because they really had a go at each other. So interesting stuff on that.
And is there quite a lot of reading as well?
Reading wise, it's a social science. Reading as in lots. Well, you've got a textbook, but reading generally, I think, is the key thing. And this goes back to reading your news articles, be they on the BBC, on the internet, or actually getting hold of old-fashioned paper, newspapers, and so on, and reading through and then starting to think, hang on a minute, this is what's going on. So I wouldn't say there's vast amounts of reading. What you do have to be prepared and comfortable with doing is writing an extended answer.
Okay, yeah.
And so by an extended answer, this could be 2, 3, 4 sides of A4.
Yeah.
So
decent length essay. Okay, well, that's really interesting to hear about the kind of day-to-day activities and things to learn about economics. What else should students consider if they're thinking about taking A-level economics?
I think the first things first is understand what you're getting into.
Okay.
So, simply understand what is the subject about, where's it going to lead in terms of content. Because it's very easy to just come up with a sort of a bland response that this is what economics is about. But I think it's when it gets into the nitty-gritty later on that it becomes really, really interesting stuff. Okay. So yeah, what is it you're getting into? That's really important. The ability to write extendedly, you've got to be confident with that. You have got to be confident with it, because there's a lot of extended writing.
Yeah.
And just have an awareness that there is a numerical side that is quite important, and does form a significant part of the overall marks that are available.
Yes.
As I mentioned previously, if you've got a reasonable grasp of GCSE economics, A-level economics doesn't involve anything more than the ability to add up, take away, subtract, and multiply.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
so
read a graph and that kind of thing.
And interpret.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to add is a lot of students have taken economics as a that's my third choice. Okay, and in the days when my school allowed sort of the four choice A levels, often as a fourth choice, but often that fourth choice becomes one of their most favourite subjects, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's probably the fourth choice because they haven't heard of it before, and they're a bit,
yes.
Oh, what am I getting into? Yeah. But actually they find it so interesting. What other A-level subjects does it go well with?
Right, what I was going to mention is, in terms of the numerical side of it all, should a student want to study it at degree level, A-level maths is a must.
Okay.
A-level maths is a must. Although a number of universities now offer a BA economics as opposed to a BSc.
Okay.
And therefore slightly lighter on the maths on the BA than the BSc. But ideally, A-level economics, A-level maths would go really well. Classic combinations, geography we've mentioned, history, politics, fabulous combination. My own daughter actually did geography, politics, and economics.
Oh, that sounds like a dream.
And German, because she was at stage one. Yeah, that's when you could do 4. And at one stage she wanted to do a German degree, but she ended up doing a geography degree.
Yeah.
And then an MSc and so on. But that's by the by. But that is a combination that works really well. But I've also had students who have been utter scientists.
Yes.
And done the in our school, biology, physics, chemistry, economics as the subject to break up all the sciencey bit. I actually had one chap who was set on doing whatever it was with his sciences, did economics, never done it before, ended up at LSE studying economics.
Wow. Yeah.
He actually took a year out
from
the end of his A levels because he'd applied to do sciencey stuff and wanted to do. But anyway, but it goes with those sort of subjects, and it's fascinating. I love it.
I can tell by the way you're talking about it. Okay, we're nearly at the end now, but have you got any final thoughts you'd like to share with us about A-level economics?
Yeah, I think as hopefully as come, I hope it's come across. It is an absolutely blindingly good, fascinating subject. If you've got any interest whatsoever in what's going on around you, do economics. It will help you understand it without a doubt.
I did hear somebody say, I can't remember where I saw this, but it was very recent, that economics has the second best rate of pay after medicine of all the subjects.
Absolutely. You are developing really good analytical and evaluative skills. Mm-hmm. And if you go on to do it at university to degree level and come out with an economics degree, you're going to be highly sought after. And the last report that I was on the BBC website 18 months ago, where they produced these, what do graduates earn? The top of the tree was the medics, and then the economists. The next. But as I might have mentioned somewhere else, not if you teach it.
If you go and work in the City of London, then maybe.
Absolutely. But no, it's a great subject. What's not to like? Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bill. It's really inspiring hearing you talk about it and how much you love the subject. And I really hope it gives people listening a window into what they can expect from this fascinating and highly relevant subject throughout people's lives, really.
Absolutely. It is one of those things that will help you understand for the rest of your life what is going on and why it's going on and its impacts, and also your ability to stand up and say, I disagree, because
amazing.
It's a fascinating subject. I love it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bill,
pleasure.
for sharing your knowledge and your time with us today.
Really, really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Wasn't that a great conversation with Bill? He is just so passionate about his subject and so knowledgeable as well. And he brings real life knowledge and experience to the subject as well. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, he is our guest speaker on the How to Revise A-Level Economics Masterclass on the 27th of March 2021. So if you'd like to come along to that, please do check out the information, which you can find through a link in today's show notes at lifemoreextraordinary.com/A-Level Economics. And yeah, I hope to see you there. So thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.